for a real NDP government that's going to do what it takes to build the housing Canadians need.
Reprise du débat, continuing debate. The honourable member for Saanich, Gulf Islands.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleagues here in the chamber after this important fall economic statement. Unlike many of my colleagues in the opposition, particularly the member for Elmwood-Transcona, we're disappointed because the opportunity to do important and urgent things right now has been ignored and forgotten. Why? I don't know. Because, like other members in this place have already said, we have the ability, we have the fiscal position that makes us able to have viable opportunities, but nothing.
All economic statement on the urgent crises facing Canadians, on health care, on housing, affordability, especially also the multiple ways in which the climate crisis is costing us. It is referenced in the fall economic statement that one reason food prices have gone up is multiple climate events that have caused crop failures, that caused prices to go up. Putin's invasion of Ukraine obviously has caused energy prices to go up, but one of the key reasons that food prices have gone up is that climate events around the world are causing bread baskets to produce less. Places that produced a lot of food are producing less. There are ways we could have used this moment of fiscal restraint to improve our climate record. This may be the last chance I have, Mr. Speaker, to speak at any length about the climate situation before I am no longer able to speak in this place, not because of a health issue, but because we don't allow Zoom from foreign countries. And, Mr. Speaker, I can't participate virtually from COP28 in Dubai. But this is a moment when the government of Canada should really be looking itself in the mirror and saying, okay, there's a reason that of all the countries on Earth, I mean, usually we stop with the G7, because Canada has the worst climate record of any country in the G7. But right now, the United Nations just released a report on the eve of COP28, which will take place in Dubai from November 30th to December 12th. It usually runs late. We'll figure 13th. But, Mr. Speaker, the United Nations just assessed the climate records and performances of every country on Earth and the gap between rhetoric and action. Every country on Earth, not just the G7, and Canada's maintaining our horrific record of being the worst. So on the gap, the United Nations Environment Programme Emission Gap Report, Canada has a 27% gap between promises and reality. Next worst is the United States with a 19% gap, then South Korea with an 18% gap, UK, 11% gap. All the countries of the developing world, known in UN parlance as the G20, have a 4% gap. What do these gaps amount to? Well, the Paris commitments that we took in 2015, which are legally binding commitments, were not to any particular target of X percent reductions against X year, because the incoming Liberals in 2015 kept in place the Harper target from May of 2015, a weak target. They kept it in place and then replaced it not until 2020, 5 years of keeping the same target. And actually, they didn't replace it till 2022, so 7 years of the same weak target. But they weren't close to hitting the weak target of the previous Conservative government. We often say in this place, Mr. Speaker, that Canada's never hit a single target it's put forward on climate. But may I be more specific? We've never gotten the direction right. Right? It's as if when we say we missed the target, it's like we were sort of maybe on a dartboard with your typical bullseye effort. Just, oh darn, we were close. if we were firing darts at a bull, the bartender better duck, because we've never gotten the direction right, okay? Never gotten the direction right. So when we promise that our emissions will go down, they go up. Now, what we're shooting for in the Paris Agreement is hanging on to global civilization. The opportunity that we had in the 80s and the 90s, and my colleague from Elmwood, Transcona, talked about when his dad was in this place. The very Honorable Bill Blakey, who was environment critic for the NDP in the 1980s when I first knew him, talked about global warming and what we had to do to avoid losing our glaciers, warming temperatures around the world. We had the chance to avoid all those things. We no longer have the chance to say that we can avoid the climate crisis, where our addiction to fossil fuels, our greed, greed is what's driving big oil in saying, yeah, we know the science, but we don't want to talk about it because all we care about is delivering profit to shareholders. By the way, that isn't good law. In Canada, the law requires that corporations think of other things, that the directors of corporations consider all stakeholders, and by the way, future generations should count for something. But we have, in the last number of decades, lost the opportunities we once had to avoid climate change and global warming altogether. And because of greed and addiction to fossil fuels and a commitment to developing and continuing to shovel money to the wealthiest in the world, the billionaire class has a priority that one doesn't understand compared to our own children and grandchildren. But right now we had an opportunity to pay attention to this report from the United Nations on the eve of COP28 and reflect any of that urgency in this economic statement. We lost that chance too. It makes one not, I don't know, I'm always torn, Mr. Speaker, between anger and grief. How do I talk to my kids about this anymore? How many of our kids don't want to have kids because of what they see in this world? But that opportunity also was there for the Minister of Finance to cut costs. So on doit utiliser les...
We have to use, we have to reduce costs and save billions of dollars, and not just share funds for fossil fuel companies. This was a fall economic statement. We need responsible budgetary management, responsible, and at the same time they continue to give money and subsidies, billions, to fossil fuels. Why not cancel the Trans Mountain Pipeline? We're talking about billions of dollars, 31 billion. What about the rights of Indigenous peoples and the future of our children and our grandchildren?
Have more money for the things the government says it cares about. Affordable housing, reducing the costs for Canadians, and cutting the costs of forest fires from one side of the country to the other. I noted in here, there's a reference in the fall economic statement on page 6 that says, well, looking at what's happened to global economic activity and the contracting of the Canadian economy, and they say, quote, well, part of this decline was tied to temporary factors, including a record-breaking wildfire season.
Temporary. I
don't think that's so temporary. We haven't hit a new normal. Some people are tempted to use that language, new normal. No. We're experiencing precursors of what only gets worse. Because our commitment, I started to talk about our commitment to the Paris Agreement for all countries all over the earth was to avoid going above 2 degrees Celsius global average temperature increase and to try to hold to 1.5 degrees. This latest report from the United Nations says we're on track to over 3 degrees. These are not political commitments. These are moral commitments based on the science that says if we don't act now, the window closes on our kids having a livable world. And we can't continue to say, as many colleagues in this place, and certainly I hear it from people a lot, the fear of what the Conservatives would do after the next election is so extreme that people are prepared to ignore that the people who are responsible for condemning our kids to an unlivable world sit on this side of the House in the Liberal caucus. We can't ignore the reality that on their watch, the people who claim to be climate leaders, and the only thing that makes the Liberals look good, they should be thanking the Conservatives, because if it wasn't for every time that the Conservative Party stood up and said, we don't want any carbon pricing, and without putting in place, you can make a better argument. You can do other things other than carbon pricing to reduce emissions. As I said, you can start canceling billions of dollars to fossil fuel companies. You could put in place what the Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre has put forward in Motion 92, an excess profits tax on the obscene profits and war profiteering of big oil. You could do that. But, Mr. Speaker, we can't continue to ignore it. The Conservatives, and I know there's many Conservative members of Parliament who care about the climate crisis and their own kids and want to be able to stand up and talk about that, but it's not the current brand. The NDP members, I know there's many who would also want to say cancel the TMX pipeline, but then they get in trouble with Rachel Notley. So this is an insanity that we're in right now. The fall economic statement, let me in with what time I have left, Mr. Speaker, I want to at least say that there's some things in here that are good, and it's about time. I'm grateful that at least there's finally cracking down on Airbnbs and the profiteering on short-term rentals that takes affordable housing out of our markets. I'm glad to finally see, I can't believe it's taken so long, to take the GST and the HST off mental health services, particularly for therapists, for going to talk, for a psychotherapist, to counselors, to take GST and HST off that. Astonishingly, that's it for measures for public health in this fall economic statement. Again, the Green Party has consistently, in every platform for how many elections, called for a national pharmacare plan. National pharmacare, not filling the gaps for people who don't have access to drugs, but a national pharmacare plan. We're the only country in the world with universal health care where covering of pharmaceutical drugs is not automatically included. And if we did that, we know from whether the Hoskins study or the report that came out of a number of major universities called PharmaCare 2020, we know that would save us billions of dollars a year in the healthcare system. That's not mentioned either. But when we look at what's here, there are many good words about caring about affordable housing, caring about cooperatives, co-op housing as a way of going forward. But we have tent cities springing up all over the place in this country. And I think, and Greens believe, it takes the kind of concerted effort that takes place after a major disaster when people are living rough. What do? What did we do as a country? Can we remember? It was a long time ago when the Halifax explosion occurred. I know the honourable member will remember the stories of that time. Obviously, he was not there then, but that Halifax explosion, within months, the government of Canada and the government of Nova Scotia built housing for thousands of people because it was an emergency. Now is an emergency, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that we will see better, because the Minister of Finance ended her speech, better is always possible. Better is possible, but not very likely unless we raise holy hell about the crises we face. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Kamal Tyre, the honourable member for Milton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think it's the first time that I get the chance to say welcome back to my friend and colleague in the House. It's good to see you happy and healthy and standing in the House of Commons. This House of Commons is so much better with the member from Saanich Gulf Islands here. I have to say that. It's great to be in a conversation where we talk about how we fight climate change, not whether we fight climate change. And I know that we can always count on the member from Saanich Gulf Islands for that insight, perspective, and strong advocacy. I'm glad that the member spoke about co-op housing. I'm never shy about the fact that I'm a proud co-op kid. My family grew up at Chautauqua Co-op, and my mom still lives there. My mom also runs co-ops and has been building co-ops, and she texted me today after some remarks yesterday in the House of Commons to say, keep talking about co-ops, because we need to keep investing in co-ops. And I was so thrilled to see an additional $309 million for cooperative housing. This is a non-market solution to a market-based problem, Mr. Speaker, and it's so critical that we invest where we can and we build long-term affordability into the housing system, and I'm thrilled that there's additional money in there. And with respect to affordability, Mr. Speaker, we know that climate change presents an existential threat, not just to our species, but also to affordability. The number one reason why food costs are up is because of climate change. So I'm glad to see the member from Saanich Gulf Islands back and healthy in this place. I thank her for advocacy, and I thank her for her speech tonight. And if she wants to share any insights on co-ops in Saanich Gulf Islands or anywhere in Victoria, I'm happy to listen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, and thanks my honourable colleague from Milton. It's also, I appreciate his kind words. At the time I had a stroke, and now there are a number of members in this place, I mean so many, who sent me nice notes and prayed, and I appreciate that a lot. But look, on co-ops, we had a commitment to $1.5 billion in budget 2023, and that money hasn't started to be spent yet, if I get that right. So we do have new money announced in the fall economic statement. But why have we not taken things faster and moved? I mean, the model of co-op housing is a perfect model. CMHC used to build a lot of co-op housing. Why are we not building the co-op housing as fast as we possibly can? Why are we still allowing real estate investment trusts to keep housing as a place for speculators to make money? We've got to have homes where there's no possible, where we, as much as possible, are making sure that people aren't investing in a speculative way, so that home for people to live is used as a mechanism for corporations to increase their profits. If we could just, I don't know where I'm going with this, Mr. Speaker, but sometimes I think if we could just deal with the word greed and change one letter, get rid of the D and add an N. We need to have policies that are designed for people who care about each other more than they care about the expanding wealth of the top 1% or 0.01% whose wealth keeps growing, while the bottom and the lowest income people struggle to. I was so disappointed that this fall economic statement doesn't provide school lunch programs or school breakfast programs. The people in low-income communities need to know that if their kid goes to school hungry, somebody will give them something to eat before they start trying to learn.
Questions and comments. Question or commentaire.
The honourable member for Terrebonne. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.